you all for joining our event with Peace Corps, helping you prepare for your global professional future. My name is Paula Levitt, and I'm the Assistant Director of Global Experiential Learning at the UC Davis Global Learning Hub. We are excited to have you here today. I just wrote a little post in the chat box. If you have any questions at any point throughout this presentation, feel free to type them into the chat box, or you can message me directly. And there will also be a time throughout the presentation for you to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have a question about a particular slide as well. And before I let John, our presenter today, introduce himself, I'm just going to go over a little bit about what the UC Davis Global Learning Hub is. So if you can go to that next slide for me, thank you. The Global Learning Hub is a resource center for your global learning experience at UC Davis. It includes opportunities such as study abroad, study away, funding and scholarship opportunities, as well as opportunities for returnees, graduate, undergraduate, as well as after graduation, what might be available to you, such as the Peace Corps. We have global learning opportunities on campus, regionally, and all across 7 continents. And especially right now, we are highlighting quite a few of our virtual opportunities, including this virtual series to help you prepare for your global professional future. We do have a global learning search tool that has hundreds of opportunities that you can search through by your major. And so feel free to check that out if you haven't yet. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker today from the Peace Corps, John Keller.
Hi, Paul. Thank you. Let me see. Am I on mute? No, I'm not. Okay. So yes, I'm John Keller. I am the Northern California recruiter. I cover everywhere north of San Francisco, but honestly, UC Davis is my #1 school because you guys are the #1 producer of Peace Corps members in this area. So I spent a lot of time on campus when it's open, and you guys are kind of my top priority because you've made Peace Corps your top priority. So I served in the Peace Corps from 2016 to 2018 in Ethiopia. A few things. I know I talk fast. I'm going to drop some ums in there. So if you ever miss something, feel free to talk in the chat into the chat box or unmute yourself. I will try and check the chat box periodically throughout, and I will try and answer your questions. So if I miss something, Paula, you can kind of let me know, but I'll try and keep the chat box open so I can, answer any questions. Feel free to type them out. I'll also say this: I will be one of the few people who do a Zoom presentation that says, "Don't worry about putting your camera on," because I know I do sometimes. I do join some Zoom things, and people say, "You know what? I really want to see your face." Well, yes, I like to see your faces. I know that you kind of just want to sit back and check your phone every once in a while, and you feel self-conscious doing that while your camera's on. So don't worry about it. If you sit back and listen, that's all I ask for. So without further ado, let's get into a little bit about what the Peace Corps is, and how you can fit into that equation, and kind of where we are as an organization right now. So first of all, why choose the Peace Corps? The Peace Corps is a 27-month service organization. It is a program of the federal government. You have a chance to join one of 6 sectors. We'll get into what those 6 sectors are in a little bit, and be the change that you want to be. It's a chance to challenge yourself. It's a chance to go out there and make some change. Maybe it might not be as big as you are expecting in your grandiose kind of altruistic ideas, but it's your chance to go test that, right? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you Peace Corps is easy, because it's not. I would be maybe one of the few recruiters that you talk to that said, this is going to be hard, and that's why you do it. It's going to be a challenge. And it's a chance for you to test yourself. And that's why, I spent 2 years in Ethiopia, and it was really the most impactful 27 months of my life. And that's why I proudly sit here as a recruiter to, tell you all about my experience and how you can make that your experience too. So yeah, let's get going a little bit. This is from my town. As I said, I served in Ethiopia. I was a TEFL volunteer, which means teaching English as a foreign language. It's very common for anyone looking into political science. I was a journalism major. Any education experience. TEFL is or TEFL and education is our generalist program. About 50% of our positions are TEFL. And before COVID-19, we had about 7,300 volunteers in the. So this is my school here. One of the interesting parts about serving the Peace Corps is you're going to get learn a new culture. Here I am in Lalo, Ethiopia, in Western Oromia, the region that I was in. I learned a language called Oromifa. And in the background there, you can see that is the director of the school, Kamal. He is addressing the students as he would do every day. And in the foreground here is Adosa. And one of the interesting parts is, like I said, you get to learn new culture. In my town, it was probably about 65% Muslim, about 35% Christian. And you got to see the coexistence of these religions kind of in a seamless fashion, which I thought was very interesting to get kind of on the ground experience. I fasted during Ramadan and I celebrated Christmas, and Ethiopia actually uses a different calendar. Does anybody know? Let's see how many people are listening, or I'd be surprised if anybody knew. Does anybody know what calendar Ethiopia uses? So we use the Julian calendar.
Do they use the Hijri, the lunar calendar?
No, but that's a good guess. They use the Orthodox calendar. It's actually the calendar that we used to use, but basically everything's about 2 weeks behind because they have 13 months of 30. They have 12 months of 30 days and then 1 month of 7 days. So it's just different. I believe it's what everyone used to use back, like 500 years ago or something, and we switched to the Julian calendar because with the leap, they also have no leap years. And I always thought it's interesting, right? Like Ethiopia has Christmas on a different day. Like, who's right? Ethiopia has Easter on a different day. Who's right? I don't know. I mean, there's probably an actual answer to that question, but it creates kind of conundrums like that, things for you to think about. And also, you can see in the background here, if you can see my cursor, can you see my cursor? You can see a net. That's a volleyball net, and I played volleyball every single day. One of the things I had no expectation of doing that, but soccer and volleyball are both very popular, and I'm not coordinated enough for soccer. And I'm luckily, tall enough, about 6'3", to play volleyball. So I play volleyball every day. So there's a lot of kind of like unexpected things that you can do. Also, you see how this is a pretty well manicured area. Once a semester, I always thought this was the most interesting thing. Once a semester, all of these students here bring their machetes to school and cut the grass. Because as the teacher said, they said the school says, how can we keep a manicured lawn? Like there's no lawnmowers or anything like that. So they get the students to come in once a semester. Everyone brings their machetes to school and cuts the grass by hand. And I would always say to Dosa, the gentleman here in the foreground, you would just go straight to jail if you try this in America, right? You're just breaking 20 different laws, right? There's child labor laws, there's weapons, all these things, and then he just says why? It's such a logical solution to a problem. You know what, you're kind of right. I don't know. It's just the way it is. All right, I'll move forward a little bit. So I kind of alluded to this earlier. Here's a little bit of information about Peace Corps and UC Davis. And since the Peace Corps founding in 1961, over 1,550 UC Davis alumni have served in the Peace Corps. I think it's a kind of a really cool statistic there, that there is, a large, history of service at UC Davis, and we look to continue that. UC Davis was a top 25 producer in the nation of Peace Corps volunteers last year. So when we get up and running again, as you are all hoping to be, we will get that back up to those numbers. And what all of you are probably thinking about is, okay, you've kind of alluded to it once or twice. What's the situation of Peace Corps and COVID-19? We are going to try. I will be completely forthcoming about everything. Feel free to ask anything you want. I know sometimes people are a little bit hesitant, I don't know. I'll just try and give you all the information I have, right? It's a fluid process that is changing day by day. But Peace Corps is still open and accepting applications. Hallelujah, I still have a job. But we are still open and accepting applications. There's no worry about Peace Corps getting anything happening to it. We have actually gotten increased funding from Congress. As I mentioned, it is a branch of the federal government. It is a federal organization. There are currently no Peace Corps volunteers in the field because it is not deemed safe because of COVID-19. But because of the application process, which is 6 to 9 months, we are still accepting applications with the hopes that we'll be able to place volunteers within that time frame. Our applications have changed a little bit. If any of you had looked at the website from even a month ago or 2 months ago, you could apply to a specific country. You could say, hey, I want to do the WASH, the teaching how it's a WASH program in Peru. That's something that really interests me. Now you can't apply to that specific country and program. Now you have to apply to a program and region. So instead of doing WASH in Peru, you would do health in South America. Now you can also say in your application, hey, look, I'm super interested in Peru or Costa Rica, whatever country really interests you. Feel free to write that. There's a blank box in the application, but you can write whatever your preferences are. But we are trying to keep volunteers a little bit more flexible because we have a re-entry team right now, but we want the volunteers to be flexible because maybe Peru gets delayed more than Costa Rica. So we say, hey, can you go to Costa Rica instead of Peru? Something like that is a little bit more what we're trying to look towards. If you're thinking about joining after college, when do you recommend applying if it takes 6 to 9 months? That's a great question. I would think about your own timeline, but so if you can apply if you haven't graduated, if you are graduated by the time you will leave. So that means if you're a senior, if you're going to be a senior this year, I recommend applying by October or January. If you want to leave right away, you can apply a little earlier than that and leave in, UC Davis is a little bit flexible as it has happened where you actually graduate like a couple weeks early if you have a locked up Peace Corps opportunity. But applying 6 to 9 months before, you do not have to be graduated, just whenever your time is. So some people want to, have a summer and then do Peace Corps. Some people want 6 months and then do Peace Corps. So then whatever 6 to 9 months is. But you do have to be graduated by the time you leave. That's the where we draw the line there. So feel free to apply totally before you graduate if you're graduating by the time you leave. I think that's so yeah, it's a good question. And so yeah, I think I covered everything here with the Peace Corps and COVID-19. Are there any other questions about Peace Corps and COVID-19? Obviously, our Peace Corps volunteers, safety is the #1 priority. In fact, we were lauded by Congress because within 1 week, all volunteers across the world, across 60 countries, were brought back to in America, which was pretty incredible. It goes to show the infrastructure of safety that is in the Peace Corps. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit here because one of the valid questions is, am I safe in my town? And the answer is yes. And I think the evidence of being able to bring back volunteers so quickly is evidence of that safety because I'll talk about it in a little bit. But when you are in the Peace Corps, it's a federal government program. The United States of America is responsible for you. So I'll get into that in a little bit, but that's good evidence there. So this is just a little bit about our Peace Corps mission. Basically, this is fancy legalistic writing about. We have 3 goals. They've unchanged since 1961. The goal 1 is to learn skills and take those skills to a country in need. Goal 2 is to learn skills from the people of that country. Goal 3 is to use those skills that you learn in that country and come back to America and teach people in America about that. So you can read those goals there. That's what they are in terms that I can understand a little bit. Like I remember I tried to memorize this and I was like, good ideas, but a little bit legalistic there. Okay, so here's an example of a UC Davis student who served in the Peace Corps. This is Austin Alcorn, who actually worked for the Peace Corps on campus at UC Davis back a few years ago. And he served in Senegal from 2009 to 2014. And you might say, John, didn't you just say that that it's 27 months? Yes, you are correct. The minimum is 27 months. You then have the option to extend on a yearly basis if you want to. So we say you have to spend at least 2 years in the Peace Corps. It's 2 years plus 3 months of training, so that's why it's 27 months. And then you have the option to extend. You can extend doing your same job. You can extend with an NGO. You can extend and be kind of a leader in Peace Corps and help train new volunteers. There's a lot of flexibility in how you extend, but that option's there. I'd say probably 15 to 20% of people do it. It's totally up to you. And yeah, here's his quote about his time serving in Senegal. All right, so here are program areas of concentrations. We have 6: agriculture, youth and development, education, environment, health, and community economic development. Agriculture, mostly what you're going to be doing is you're essentially going to be a teacher in that field. So agriculture, what you're going to be doing UC Davis is one of our biggest producers of agriculture volunteers. I guess that's probably not a surprise to you all. Is you're going in, you're a lot of times teaching new methods. Like, for example, we had a big program in Panama where we worked in conjunction with the Panamanian government where they're growing rice. Rice is a staple crop there. But in rural areas, they are largely using slash and burn techniques. So what they were doing is the Peace Corps volunteers were getting training through the Panamanian government and Peace Corps, and then going into rural areas and teaching farmers how to use irrigation rice farming so they could double their yields. So the goal there was to just increase yields of farmers. So that's a lot of the times what you're doing. You should kind of be an agriculture teacher and advisor. There was like an agricultural volunteer in Ethiopia who planted an apple orchard like 5 or 10 years ago, right? And apples take a long time to grow, and so that volunteer never got to see the fruits of their labor. But now there's apples in one of the towns close to Metu. Youth and development is what I like to think of as like a boys and girls club in that country. One of our biggest programs of youth and development success is in actually Morocco. And why I say boys and girls club is because you might be working with a school. If you're working at a school, maybe at a community center, but you're not doing direct teaching in the classroom. You're kind of trying to work with youth about how to have productive time outside of school. So that's why it's youth and development and not education. Education is pretty straightforward. You're direct teaching. I was an English teacher. There's math teachers. There's science teachers. Really, whatever type of teacher you can think of, we probably have it. Majority being English teachers. Environment is our newest program. One of our biggest programs is actually working in the Philippines. And what you're doing is combating climate change. You're working with coastal communities about how to either reallocate resources to move back houses because their shorelines are disappearing, or it's working with them about how to best a new source of income with the declining fish populations in coastal areas. Health is kind of similar to agriculture, where you're like a health advisor, you're a health teacher. You go into areas and you might work with vaccines. In Ethiopia, one of the big health programs was going into rural areas, and there was one of the big staples in the South was a false banana. I don't know what the actual English term is. It's not a plantain, I thought, but that's a staple food, and so the children were eating a lot of this false banana, and they weren't underfed, but they were malnourished because of lack of vitamins. And so what Peace Corps volunteers would go into these rural areas and educate mothers about how to give a complete vitamin profile to their children. And then community economic development is like the business aspect, where you're kind of working with a person who's interested in creating a business or improving their business. Like, for example, in Costa Rica, one of our big programs is rural tourism. They are groups of people who live in rural areas who say, hey, look, this is Costa Rica, it's beautiful. How do we get kind of foreign money in here? And because we want to do everything right, but we just don't have the skills and education to create a foreign vacation area. And so what the Peace Corps volunteer does is they'll go in and basically do everything that needs to be done to make that possible. So it can be construction, like helping construct like an area for people to sleep. It can be mapping out like a park or like nature walks. It can be setting price points for what is a reasonable expectation for what to make and what to charge. So really, you go in and you're just kind of a business advisor. Whatever needs to be done, you do it. Sierra asks, is environment more policy making? Do you work with government figures or just with citizens of the community? So I would say the first part, is it more policy making? Not so much, because you're more working with the direct community. But I would say that you would work with government at times. If you are doing a project, you will probably almost certainly have to work with the very local government to do a project. Like, let's say you try to build a seawall or something like that, which is totally feasible. You would have to then kind of work with the local government about how to get that done. But your main focus in environment in any Peace Corps program is working with the community. The idea behind the Peace Corps is not as you're more adapting to the policy. You're creating change to adapt to policy. You're saying, hey, look, I am going to this country. I am adapting to their context. I'm adapting to their language. I'm adapting to other things. I'm going to provide the skills that I have within their context. So if they ask for policy change, you can kind of make recommendations. And I know there are examples of Peace Corps volunteers who have done that. But most of the time, you're going into a smaller community and you're working with those individuals in that community. Okay. Here's a little bit of information about where you can serve. One thing to note here is that China was shut down actually pre-COVID. It had nothing to do with COVID-19, but China was shut down as, well, it was a point of Marco Rubio and Rick Scott. They didn't like Peace Corps China. But besides that, these are other countries. We have actually just opened Peace Corps Kenya as well. And one thing to note is that as we do reentry into all of these countries, all the staff is still, all the infrastructure is still there for Peace Corps. So it's not, we don't have to kind of reestablish ourselves. Everyone is still on payroll. Everything's good to go. So as we reopen into these countries, it should be relatively, it's not going to, no reopening is going to be completely seamless, but we won't have to reach out and kind of do things over again. Any questions about where you can serve? Nope, looks good. One thing to note with the new application process is that you now apply based on the region. So you apply to like South America is the way one of the regions works, or you apply to Asia. That's how the application process works. Okay. I'll get a little bit of benefits during service. When you're in service, you get a living stipend. It depends on where you are. I made about $150 a month, and that's exactly what an Ethiopian English teacher would have made. In Mongolia, it's about $500. In Costa Rica, it's like $600 or $700. It's totally adjusted, basically what that person in that role from that country would make. Your housing is totally paid for outside of your living stipend. Let me answer Simone real quick before. Does every region offer programs in all the 6 sectors listed? No, it's totally dependent on each country. Basically what happens is Peace Corps goes to the country and says, hey, do you want Peace Corps? And the country says yes or no. And then if the country says yes, then we say, what programs do you want? Here's our 6 programs. If you want to create a new program, that's totally cool too. Like for example, in Zambia, they work with, Peace Corps works a lot with, they have a unique program with like fish hatcheries with local rural communities, and that's totally unique to Zambia. And so we asked them, hey, here's our 6 programs. Which ones do you want? And so they can choose however many they want. For example, I can tell you in Nepal they have English and agriculture. In Ethiopia they have English, agriculture, and health. In the Philippines, I keep saying English, education. Just in Ethiopia they only have English. In some places they have math, like science, agriculture, and so forth. Is there a reason why Peace Corps is not involved in Honduras? I believe we were involved in Honduras, but it was a safety issue. So I'll get to safety in a little bit, but basically Peace Corps, your safety is the number one priority. And so there's one of 2 reasons we're not in a country. 1, safety. 2, they don't want us there. In every single post in Peace Corps, we have been requested for that exact position, because the idea of Peace Corps is to not put ourselves in any position where we are not requested, so that there's kind of a seamless acceptance there. So they have requested us for those exact positions. So I believe Honduras was a country up until then. There's safety issues.
There's 2 other questions that came in before. The first one is, would it be possible to go to law school and then join the Peace Corps?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, it's totally possible. There's no age limit on Peace Corps. If you want to get the job of your dreams, like I didn't join Peace Corps right out of college. I got what I thought was the job of my dreams. And then a year later, I was like, you know what? It's not the job of my dreams. Then I joined the Peace Corps. Our oldest volunteer was 86 years old before she got brought back. So whenever you want to join the Peace Corps, we're here. And
the other question is if you can go a little deeper into when loan cancellation might be possible.
Yes. I'll get to that now, and then I'll jump back to medical and dental coverage. So the way student loan deferment and cancellation works, and I'm very well versed in this because I got a lot of loans, whether I like it or not, as is the American way these days. So the deferment for all your public loans, I can all but almost guarantee that 99.9% that you won't have to pay anything while you're in the Peace Corps, because you will do an income-based repayment plan, and Peace Corps will say, okay, sounds good, you make $150 a month, you don't have to pay anything. Or sorry, no, the federal government will say you don't have to pay anything. The way the cancellation works is with like Perkins loans. Some universities will cancel your Perkins loans, a certain percent for Peace Corps. It all depends on your institution and your specific situation. So you basically have to ask the Broussard's office, hey, look, I was a Peace Corps volunteer, will you cancel any of my loans? And then, like, for example, at University of Wisconsin, they canceled $2,000 on my loans. And I was like, great, that's $2,000, I don't have to pay that. It also counts as 2 years towards the 10 years of federal service. So like if you're a federal employee for 10 years, they will cancel your loans. Peace Corps counts as federal service. I'll get into a little bit about how federal service kind of works, but it counts towards 2 years. So after 10 years, the federal government will cancel your student loans, and this counts towards that. Okay, did I cover all the questions there? All good questions. Keep them coming. Sorry, I'll try and read them as they come in. I guess I missed two, but I got Paula here. Woo. All right, so medical and dental coverage. Your medical and dental is absolutely 100% covered. I'll get to that question here right after this. 100% covered by the Peace Corps. That ranges, we had a guy in Ethiopia who fell off a 4-story building and broke his back and femur, and Peace Corps paid for emergency surgery that night. They still pay his medical bills to this day regarding that injury, because he's still like walks with a cane, because it happened during his Peace Corps service. So there is a 24/7 doctors on call from your country. So like there was 3 doctors employed by Peace Corps in Ethiopia who are only for Peace Corps members. So 3 doctors for 150 people. That's pretty good ratio there. Like I got kidney stones at about 3 in the morning, and I called the doctors, and they're luckily they have an American standard of education, but they are nationals of that country. So like when I was breathing in pain at 3 a.m. and my neighbors would come in because they heard me groaning, the doctors were able to communicate, hey, John's got a kidney stone. I had him before, so I was like, I got a kidney stone, and so they were able to convey like what to do. They paid for everything. They pay for anything medical related. Peace Corps pays for. If you need to be shipped to a different country to do surgery or something like that, they'll pay for that. So you need to bring your home and because you're sick or it, they'll pay for that. They pay for everything. I chipped a tooth, they paid to fix that. Is it possible to join the foreign service after Peace Corps? Yes, it's extremely common. Peace Corps is, great. There are a large portion of the foreign service has been in the Peace Corps because they just like naturally go hand in hand. Because Peace Corps is kind of on the ground experience in a country in a rural setting, whereas foreign service is policy making from an urban setting. So it's extremely common to, in fact, you can take the Foreign Service Officer exam while in the Peace Corps because it's totally free to take, and so you can take it at any embassy. So you can sign up and do it during your Peace Corps time. So it's extremely common, totally feasible. Vacation time, you get about 2 weeks per year of vacation time, but Peace Corps is very generous with that. They're very flexible in terms of your vacation time because they understand that you're in a stressful environment. So as long as you're responsible, you can take pretty much as much time as you want off. I think there's a rule that you can't be out of your town longer than a month, which I think is totally reasonable. So just be responsible. If you want to take a vacation, they'll let you take a vacation, and you're pretty good to go with that. And also people can come visit you. I had my mom and sister come visit me in Ethiopia, so I thought that was a really showed them where I lived, and my school kind of threw a party for them. Career skills and training. So really, whatever you want your career to be, Peace Corps will, and some will try and facilitate to help you. And sometimes in ways that you might not even know, which I think is really beneficial. For example, Peace Corps gives you grant writing training. I didn't really think honestly, like, I don't know, grant writing, that's like a very like big but hard skill. And Peace Corps does a training with you after you're in your town of service for 6 months. They tell you to bring a counterpart from your town, another fellow teacher, or fellow somebody who's from your town, come into a bigger town. We're going to give you training about how to write a grant with the U.S. government. And they say, what's a problem in your town? And here's a training about how to write a grant to fix that problem. And it's really cool because they give it to you and your counterpart, right? Because sure, I could have written a grant, but I don't know the context quite as deeply as somebody from that town, and somebody who's experienced that problem for longer than 6 months, right? So they give you that training, and then they help you along the way in terms of writing the grant, supporting the grants in, I believe, every country. And I know in Ethiopia, there is somebody 100% dedicated to only grants. So I wrote a grant for the problem that was deemed in my town was they taught computer class, ICT class, but there were no computers. They taught it from a book. So it was very natural to get a grant for computers. And one interesting thing about grants with Peace Corps is that the community has to fund at least 25% because, again, they don't want the American government just throwing money. They want it to be kind of community based and sustainable. That's why you and your counterpart come up with it. And so for a lot of times it can be labor. It doesn't have to necessarily be money. It can be labor, it can be time, it can be like resources. That's like, I had a buddy who built a new building, and so the community donated resources and labor. But for computers, it's pretty much money. And I, went around with my counterpart. We had a whole proposal that we had written out, and we, lobbied the local governments, the local businesses. Hey, will you give us money? The local schools and education departments. If you give us a total of $1,200, we'll get the computers through the American government for about $5,000. And so we did that, and we're successful. And there's now a computer lab in Lalo Secondary School with 18 computers that I'm very proud of. So that's some of the hard skills that they teach you. Jose asked, how would housing look like? Do we live with other Peace Corps volunteers or in individual spaces? Good question. So I can almost certainly you will not live with other Peace Corps volunteers. So you go in, when you join the Peace Corps, you go in with a cohort. It's normally about 25 to 50 people. You get training together for the first 3 months. And you'll live for the first 3 weeks, you'll live in the same hotel as these 25 to 50 people. Then after that 3 weeks, you'll live in probably a town close to the capital, but you'll live with a family from that country. But you'll live like next door to other Peace Corps volunteers. So that's from after 3 weeks to the end of your training is when you live with this host family. After that's finished, you get put into a town of service, which is largely, you'll probably be there by yourself. There's a chance there's another Peace Corps volunteer there, but it's unlikely. And so then you live, some countries, it depends on them, have a host family that you live with, where you're living in a room with a family. Some places you just have a house, like a house or an apartment that's totally your own. I lived in a house, or I guess it was like part of a apartment. It was kind of like 1 story, and I had a room, and that was totally by myself. Peace Corps has certain standards of your housing. They go in beforehand, and they clear every place because there's certain standards that every Peace Corps housing place must have. It's things like a window, like a secure lock, things like that. So they say, all right, John's going to live here. It has a secure lock. It has a landlord we're comfortable with. It has a window, things like that. So it depends on the country, but most likely you will live most likely by yourself. But also one of the requirements is living in a compound with other people, because they don't want you living totally by yourself, because that's kind of deemed unsafe if you were just off by yourself. Also difficult socially. How are host families chosen, vetted by the Peace Corps? Yeah, so a lot of times they are kind of government employees of the local governments, and they are just vetted by the host country staff who work for the Peace Corps. So basically, Peace Corps goes out into the suburb close to the capital that you're going to be living with your host family at, and they go to the local government office and say, hey, look, can we have a Peace Corps member live here? And do you have trustworthy families who we can send to you? And they also give those host families a stipend of food and money to kind of support you. And so that's how they choose them, and they try and go to families who are deemed good families. They re-up with them. Basically, they send a Peace Corps volunteer the next year. And Also, you're thinking, well, some host families probably aren't very good. That can happen too. So it's just is what it is. So they try and do their best to vet them, but sometimes there's some host families that aren't amazing. All right. Any more questions? Here we go, Sierra. In Peace Corps training, do you talk about colonialism, American supremacy, and how to avoid those practices? Yes and no. Serving in a country like Uganda, you'll have more kind of training on that because that was a country that was colonized. In a place like Ethiopia, where I served, there wasn't too much training on that because Ethiopia was never colonized. So there's no concern about that from the people. So it kind of depends on your situation. One thing, but yes, I was asked like that does kind of come up even no matter where you are. And the most consistent answer that is the truth is that no matter where you are, any position in all of Peace Corps, every single Peace Corps volunteer has been asked to be there by that country. That is one of the main reasons why we do that, so that we don't have to defend ourselves for putting people somewhere. We don't put people anywhere. That country has asked us to put people there. So that is how we kind of avoid that, because I think that's a totally valid concern. For a country, for the people of that country. I got asked 100 times if I was a spy, and one thing I would always say is, also it's like surprisingly an Illuminati. Oh, that's what they say in Ethiopia. I don't mean. Oh man, sorry, I don't mean that. That's the they do that symbol. I know that has different connotations now that I am gonna apologize for immensely. They do that symbol to say Illuminati. That's very popular in Ethiopia. I apologize for, I don't support any of that. That's really bad. But they do that symbol for Illuminati. Sorry, I did not. The CIA, they say, are you a member of the CIA? And what I would always say is that if I was in the CIA, why would I be in this town? And they say, touche. Like, because my town is very rural. All right, let's move forward. Any other questions? Okay. All right, here's another example. We have 3 total examples of UC Davis students in the Peace Corps, and this is Whitney Galindo. She graduated in 2016. She worked in clinical nutrition, and here's a little bit about her and when she served in Zambia. Zambia is one of our biggest posts, and it's has a long history with the Peace Corps. And so a lot of times when you're in the Peace Corps, you will be serving in a place where there's been a Peace Corps member there for 30 years or so, and that can be that has its own challenges because they expect certain things of you, and sometimes, like, I was the first volunteer in my town and they said, what's Peace Corps? We don't know what that is. So it all depends on your situation. But yeah, so here's a little bit about the Whitney, her experience in Zambia, and how UC Davis kind of prepared her for living there. All right, safety and health. I kind of touched on this a lot. There's also a 24/7 security team. So sometimes if something does happen, we understand that it's probably not going to be, at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, right? So there's a 24/7 security team that will come to you by whatever means necessary to help you out. In fact, in my town, I didn't even know this until at the very end. They're like, yeah, we have an area scoped out for a landing strip if we need to, like, land a plane there. It's like, oh my God. So safety is the Peace Corps' #1 priority. And the reason why I always feel that's the truth is because in the Peace Corps, you are there as under the protection of the federal government, right? So if something happens to you, it is on the U.S. government. So the U.S. government has deemed that it is safe for Whitney to be in her town in Zambia. So they will use all their resources to make sure you're safe if something happens, right? So that's why I always felt safe in the Peace Corps. There's community immersion training. That's why you live with host families, so you can learn about a community and kind of be totally immersed in it, so you can see how they operate on a day-to-day basis instead of like living in a hotel or living by yourself. You've lived with a family of that country and see how they interact and what they do on their free time, things like that. And there's dedicated victim advocacy. Sometimes when things happen, Peace Corps tries to be as flexible as possible about how the victim, wants to express themselves, what support they want. We try to be as flexible as possible to what the victim needs. Sometimes it may not be to speak publicly right away. That's why we try to have different ways to report things, to make sure that they are reported and to make sure that victim is supported in the way he or she needs to be supported. So that's one thing that's very important to us. Any questions? I know I touched on this stuff a little earlier and I kind of went through it quickly now. Okay, benefits after serving. So this number has changed. Oh, I'm supposed to re-up this. It's a little over $10,000 now. So Peace Corps adjusts with time. So when you get back to America, they cut you a check just for $10,000. They just put it right in your bank account. It's one thing I didn't know about the Peace Corps. So basically, they understand that if you've been making $150 a month for 2 years, that you need some money to come back to America to, that you can't afford to put a security deposit down on a new apartment. You got to pay a security deposit and the first month's rent. You're not going to have that money. That's why they give you this $10,000 to make sure that you have enough money to kind of reestablish yourself. There are graduate school benefits with over 130 universities around the country. You get at least 33% off tuition. That includes, full rides at University of Oregon. That includes full rides at University of South Florida. It includes like $60,000 off George Washington University, and it's still like $80,000. So there's a wide range of graduate school benefits. If you go to, it's called the Coverdale Fellows Program. And it'll list exactly how much you get off for each program. Federal employment advantages. I guess I'll skip to first professional networking and career services. There is also a Return Peace Corps Volunteer Jobs website where basically different NGOs, different federal government positions all advertise. If you go to RPCV Jobs, Return Peace Corps Volunteer Jobs, you can look at all of them. There's like 30 or 40 posted a day because people really like to have Return Peace Corps volunteers as employees, because they're very flexible, hardworking. They are, often very good at being creative. So that's why that's a very popular place to find a job. Federal employment advantages. You get what's called non-competitive eligibility, which is called NCE. And what that means is basically your resume gets put to the top of the stack for federal jobs. And the reason why that is you've been pre-cleared by the federal government. So basically in the Peace Corps, you get kind of a security clearance, and so your security clearance is still good. So when the Forest Service needs to hire somebody, they want to hire somebody with NCE, with non-competitive eligibility, not because you're an amazing person, which very well may be true too, but because they can fill that job a lot quicker with somebody with NCE. Normally it takes about a year from the time that somebody gets offered a job to when they can actually start the job in the federal government. Bureaucratic processes, basically you're streamlined for that. You can start within about a month or so. So that's why places want to hire you with NCE, because they can fill that role faster. That's why NCE is such a good benefit to have. And the federal government is massive. So there's a lot of different jobs, whether it's, working for NOAA and working with the weather, to the Forest Service, to the Social Security Administration, to Peace Corps, all part of the federal government. Public service loan forgiveness, I kind of mentioned that earlier. You get 2 years towards the 10 years. Celine said, is there any way to prepare for Peace Corps if you plan on doing it in a couple of years? Yes, service and leadership. Those are the two things we look for. So any opportunity, it can be volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club. It can be taking a leadership role in a student organization you're in. Those are the two big things we look for: service, leadership, and intercultural competency. So it can be any time where you're interacting with a different culture than your own. There's some of the big things we look for there.
Can I also add a little bit to that?
Absolutely.
Since I supervise folks who work for our UC EAP program in Study Abroad at the Global Learning Hub, if you're still early on in your UC Davis career and you're considering study abroad, if you do happen to study abroad through UC EAP, which is our system-wide program, they have an optional certificate that you can apply to any of the countries where you might study abroad, called the Peace Corps Prep. Do you know more about that, John? Or
yes, I do. So
okay,
Peace Corps Prep.
Explain that, because that could be something that might be of interest to students who still have a couple more years of school as they're preparing.
Yes, so Peace Corps Prep is a UC system-wide program where you can basically take certain classes if you're early in your career, and a lot of times even midway through you can still do it, where you do have to study abroad for the UC one, which I kind of don't like because I think it cuts it off for some people who can't study abroad. But you have to do certain things like do service, you have to take do leadership, take certain classes, do study abroad, and then you get a certificate from the Peace Corps that says basically you're prepared for the Peace Corps. And it can be, you don't have, there's no binding obligation to the Peace Corps also. So I think if you are already taking classes that have like an intercultural, vibe to them, and you are already doing service and leadership, do get the certificate and just boost your resume. Also, it looks really good if you're applying to the Peace Corps. So that's definitely 100% an option. It's called Peace Corps Prep, and it's through the UC system. And yes, so public service loan forgiveness, I talked about that earlier. How would you find those classes or study abroad opportunities and get that certification? So when you contact, I think you can contact Jenny Moyland, but we'll have it. And there's another advisor, whose name is escaping me, who is the liaison for the Peace Corps Prep program. They have a literal list of the classes that you can take. Oh, there we go. There we go. Crushed it. What is the acceptance rate of Peace Corps? The acceptance rate of Peace Corps, and normally we have about 2.5 applicants per position, but there's a couple caveats there. I'd say, first of all, if you're at UC Davis, you're doing pretty well, because if you got to UC Davis, you worked hard in the past, that shows a history of academic prowess and success that sets you off in a path that would be very good for the Peace Corps. So the acceptance rate is about whatever the math is there. I'm clearly not a math major, but for every position about 2.5. And that's also totally turned into flux by COVID-19, which has thrown our kind of system into a little whack. So that's what our normal acceptance rate is, where things are a little bit strange now. Okay, let's keep going. The access to affordable health insurance, honestly, this is like during your Peace Corps time, you have free health insurance, and then afterwards you have access to affordable health insurance for 3 to 6 months. It's not really something that people rely on for a very long time. Here's a little bit about the graduate school benefits. One of the nice parts about this, and one thing I want to make sure to stay, is that you get this benefit. You are a Coverdale Fellow. You can apply to these programs and get the benefits of being a Peace Corps member for your entire life. You can go back in 20 years and get those benefits. But with that non-competitive eligibility, like I mentioned, you only get that for 1 year after your Peace Corps service. Like I said, it's kind of a security clearance thing. So you can use it 364 days after your Peace Corps service, but at 366 days, you can't use it. It expires. Now, if you go to graduate school directly after Peace Corps, you can then use it after your graduate school. So you can basically put a pause on it until 1 year after you're finished with graduate school. So I know that's a little bit complicated. If you're more interested, feel free to contact me. Does anyone have any questions on that? I want to make sure I get through. I think we're pretty close to done. I just want to make sure I answer any final questions. Leave a little time for that. And here's Sharon. She was a UC Davis student who served in Ethiopia from 2016 to 2018. I'm a little bit biased because I served with her. So we were good friends. And here she is at working at a school in her town of, what was it, Dame. What law school count as one of the graduate schools? It depends. So yes, there are law schools, and when you go to, hold on, let me see if I can, well, I'll post a link here. You can look at, if you go to the Coverdale Fellow program for Peace Corps, you can filter them based on program. So you can say medical, international affairs, law, and it'll list exactly the law programs that this program has. Okay, can I repeat what I just said? Okay, yes, about so the non-competitive eligibility, which I explained, gives you basically priority for federal jobs. That is only good for 1 year after your Peace Corps service. The reason being, it's because you're basically security cleared. So after 1 year, you don't have that anymore. Now, if you go to graduate school directly after your Peace Corps service, that 1 year can be paused and put to the end of your graduate school. So then, if you want to get your degree and your master's degree in business management, and then go into the federal government, you can use that non-competitive eligibility after you finish your master's degree. So I hope that that makes sense. I know it's kind of convoluted there. That's right. And you're also like trying to think like way down the line. Okay, we're good. Kind of links to schools. Yes, I'll post that link. Actually, Paul, can you? If you just type in Coverdale Fellows, you can just it'll come right up on Google, and I'll all right. One thing to keep in mind too, as we're getting towards the end, it's never too late to be a volunteer. If you want to accept your dream job, feel free to put Peace Corps on the back burner, and then it's always there. Peace Corps has been in operation since 1961. Peace Corps is always there. So you can always maybe have it in the back of your mind for when it's the right time for you. Sierra said, wait, so for graduate schools, there are programs that are paid for if you've done Peace Corps? Yes. So I'll go back to that. So I did the best job of explaining that. So with over 130 programs around the country, it's called the Coverdale Fellows Program. You get at least 33% off tuition for graduate schools. There we go. Crushing it, Paula. And here's the exact programs, and you can filter it based on what programs you're interested in, based on what state you're interested in, because it's not like UC Davis isn't on there. You don't want to go to graduate school there anyway. But so it depends on the universities. So you can look at what programs, and I think it's also very interesting to think about what programs you're interested in, and then look to see what programs they have. Like I was kind of looking at graduate schools to see the different kind of international sales programs they have, and there's just a wide range of them. Ranging from Arizona State to Georgetown to Princeton to American University. There's University of Oregon. They're all over, and they're extensive. So that tells you exactly which graduate schools are a program with Peace Corps, the Coverdale Fellows Program. And that is lifetime eligibility. There are never any limits on that. So if you do Peace Corps and then 20 years later want to go to graduate school, you can come back and look at this list and then become a Coverdale Fellow for that program.
I'm sorry, John, you may have mentioned this. For the Coverdale Fellows, do you have to apply, or is it automatic if you go to one of those schools?
Yes, you have to apply. So each listing on the link that Paula posted will give you exact instructions on how to apply as a Coverdale Fellow. So yeah, you apply as a Coverdale Fellow. A lot of times also, one thing when you're applying to graduate schools after the Peace Corps, you become an asset to that university. So for example, there's a professor at Humboldt State who applied to University of Oregon and didn't get a Coverdale Fellow because they didn't have his program. That's the reason why. And so he said, hey, look, I was in the Peace Corps. I learned Russian. Is there anything we can do? And they said, yes, if you are a Russian TA, we'll give you a full ride. And so he got a full ride for his doctoral program because at a graduate school, when you're coming from undergrad, you're trying to get into a good program. But remember, a graduate school wants to have a diverse experiences, and Peace Corps is the most diverse experience that is almost out there. So you become an asset to graduate schools because you have this incredible opportunity abroad. So one thing to think is that the one way I think of it is when you're applying to graduate schools, whatever you're thinking of out of undergrad, you can at least tier up in terms of what you were thinking towards. Any other questions on that? I know I kind of like jumped around to different things about the graduate schools. And again, lastly here, and I want to make sure to respect everybody's time. So I have 5 minutes left. Do your research. The more research you do, the more understanding you have, and just kind of the best way, both ways to figure out what opportunity is the best for you. And there's Sharon again. It's never too late to be a volunteer. And there we go. So here's my contact information. There's my email there. I'll type it here in the chat as well. My name is John Keller. I'm your recruiter. I will. If campus reopens, I'll be there. If not, I'll be in my apartment in Sacramento. I am close. I am your recruiter. I am here. Any conversation you want to have, if you want to get more specific, feel free to email me. We can set up a time to talk. If you want to like copy and paste it. Whatever specific questions you have, and I will leave this last 5 minutes to any questions that you all have about the Peace Corps. And if it's none, then I've done a great presentation, and that's rare.
Thank you, John. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have other questions as well. I would also be curious to hear from you if you have any other requests for types of info sessions that we can provide you in the future as we are continuing to offer virtual sessions. They could be, for example, subject specific or region specific. If you're particularly interested in hearing more, we'd love to hear your ideas. But it looks like some folks might have some questions. I see a couple people who have unmuted themselves. So Kimberly, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if it's possible to propose, say, a program that may not be offered now, but maybe something like that I might be interested in pursuing.
Yes. So yes, I should say yes and no. So it's very possible to do that after your 2 years.
Okay.
Also, with that being said, you have a lot of autonomy while you're in the Peace Corps to do what you want. So you will have a primary project. Like my primary project was teaching English, but I did Camp Glows, which was a initiative by Michelle Obama, which was Girls Leading Our World, to do camps with Camp Glows. So I did 2 of those. I also did a women's volleyball club. So there's a lot of flexibility to do whatever you would like outside of your primary project, but your primary project is your primary project. But most primary projects don't take up 8 hours a day, honestly. So also, with that being said, after your 2 years, you can submit a proposal to extend doing basically whatever you like within that country. So if you say, hey, look, like for example, in Ethiopia, there was a guy who tracked elephants. And he said, look, there's a need to know where these elephants are. There's some like national park rangers who kind of work with tracking them, but I can be an asset to them. And Peace Corps said, okay, sounds good. You do that. So we did that. So there's a lot of flexibility while in your primary project for your first 2 years, and then a ton more if you want to extend.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
We have another question that came in. I know you're a recruiter, but what kind of difficulties did you experience during your time as a Peace Corps volunteer?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely totally valid question that I probably should answer in my first 55 minutes. But like I said, Peace Corps is hard. For me, it was simultaneously the most lonely I've been and the least lonely I've been. And the reason why I say that is, like, I was in a town that welcomed me, that was amazing, that I enjoyed my time there. But at the same time, I was the only American there, right? If I ever wanted to complain about the office, like nobody really kind of could do that with me. But at the same time, if I left my house, everyone was talking to me. The children were yelling my name on the street. Every time I left my house, I kind of had to be on because people were kind of yelling at me. Sometimes it was kind of just, there was no ill intent towards it, but still, it's just kind of drains you a little bit. So some days I was like, I'm just tired of interacting a lot. And there's nobody here that I can talk to face to face. There are other people I could call, and I would call my friends, and we would support each other. But at the same time, it's much different than kind of being face to face, as you're probably learning with this quarantine. That can be exhausting in a foreign place. So yeah, it's honestly, I'd say like the physical difficulties you kind of get over pretty quickly. Like eventually, like I learned how to shower once a week with a bucket. That's just honestly, that's not a difficulty. But in your Peace Corps service, emotionally is up and down. You're gonna go a month without seeing another American, and I had never done that before. So how do you handle that? Some days it's totally fine. I don't worry about it. I'm like, screw them. I don't need them. Some days you're like, I just want to relax and have a beer with somebody and I don't know, talk about nothing. And you can't do that. And so that's also why it's a chance for you to grow. But it's hard. It's difficult.
Any other questions?
All right. Well, let's go. Oh, we have one more. Do volunteers have access to internet, or does it depend on the community? I would say almost certainly depends on the community, but there's a very high likelihood that you will have access to it. Where I was, you had access to, there was no Wi-Fi in my town, 3G, and it was a little expensive, so I think I would check the internet about once per day, which honestly was much better for my mental well-being than having constant access to through my phone. but I would say most communities do. The only outlier would be maybe if you're in the South Pacific and you're on, like if you're in the Philippines and you're on a outlying coastal community, there's a chance that there's no service there. But most places do. So yeah, most places do. Also, like my network would go down frequently. I would probably have service for, I mean, I probably had, my longest one was probably a week without service, but most days I probably had it for about 6 hours a day. Maybe a little more than that. 6 hours of my waking day. So at times I didn't, times I did. It was just kind of depended on whether I had service or not, which was very whimsical and there weren't really reasons behind it. But yeah, good question. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. And yeah, thanks for your time and wonderful info session.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. This will be recorded and I can send the link out after. Thanks again.